This program is brought to you by Emory University.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon. Nan Bartlett has allowed me to grab the microphone first to get your attention, and really I only want to offer some greetings. First of all, greetings to all the friends of the Emeritus College. Thanks for being here. Special thanks to Jag and Madhu Sheth. For those of you who don't know, support of these kinds of lectureships and awards, this is only one example of the several, and I'm sure Jag's kept count, and I should have kept count. There's several ways that this couple has supported Emory and scholarship in general. Jag, Madhu, thank you all very, very much for this. I understand that this has been going on since 2003, and we have the very first speaker from 2003 with us, and that's Jim Laney. Jim, good to have you here. And finally, I just want to offer my personal greeting and appreciation for Elizabeth Quiche being here. For those of you that have not yet met her, you will be energized by her energy and also her deep sense of integrity. That will come through in her conversation with you today, I am sure. She's been no stranger on this campus. Every now and then she lets me sit next to her when she comes, and in fact, I think the last time we sat with each other, it was on a panel on ethics in the academy with Robert Franklin, you and I serving on it. But anyway, just a special welcome. But you deserve a more formal introduction. And you deserve, all of you here, all of the news about Emeritus College. And so to do that, I want to turn the lectern over to our director of the Emeritus College, Nan Bartlett. Nan, please.
Thank you very much, President Wagner. I do have a few remarks and announcements because I have you as a captive audience at the moment. President Quiche, President Wagner, President Lane, members of the Emeritus College, ladies and gentlemen, this welcome to the 7th annual Sheth Distinguished Lecture on Creativity in Later Life. This is a spring event, an indoor picnic, and is made possible by a generous gift from Madhu and Jag Sheth. The Sheths are with us today, and I will ask them to stand so that we can all show them our appreciation. Madhu and Jag, I want you both to know that this is an eagerly anticipated event in the Emeritus College calendar, and we really thank you for your generosity. I want to extend also my thanks to the Emory Alumni Association for their co-sponsorship and making it possible for us to have this elegant setting for our event. So Martha and Lindsay, thank you both very much. And last, but certainly not least, is what I'd like to call the behind-the-scenes crew of Charity Crabtree, who is Senior Program Coordinator with the Emeritus College. Charity, would you stand up? Charity is also a postdoctoral fellow in sociology, and we are delighted to have her with us. And Heather Sherman, Heather, who is a doctoral candidate in sociology. So I am surrounding myself by sociologists. And I also want to thank Pat Douglas, who is here today as our most welcome volunteer. Pat, thank you. I also want to mention to you that an audio tape is being made of this address today, and it will be available on our website and in other ways for perhaps going to Wesley Woods to play it. So I think we're extending our audience just a little bit by doing that. And very much behind the scenes is George Nickus, who is actually recording somewhere in the back. You know, standing at this podium gives me just a little bit of power and particularly in this very group of very distinguished individuals. So I'm going to make the most of my moment here before you. It's my pleasure to report that the Emory Emeritus College is doing well, it's growing, it's getting stronger. You just need to look around today at who are here, and also the friends from across the university who have come to join us. Now, on your name tags, you may have noticed stars. And I wanted to tell you just a little bit about the stars, what the colors signify. Now, certainly, each of you is a star in your own right. But I will tell you a little bit about the color coding. Now, the red stars are our invited guests, and we are happy to have all of you here. The gold stars signify our membership, those who have gone through the membership process, which we started in the fall of 2009. And the blue stars are friends, sometimes friends of the Emeritus College, spouses of Emeritus College members. And I want all of us to give a round of applause to the membership of the Emeritus College. I want to tell you how much you do for us in the Emeritus College office, all of you, and I am most grateful. You are part of the reasons why the Emeritus College is successful and moving toward bigger and better things. One more important message that I have to share with you is I want to tell you about an upcoming event, an opportunity. The Emeritus College and the Emory University School of Nursing are co-sponsoring our first retirement symposium. That's going to be on Saturday, April 10th, from 9:30 in the morning until 3 in the afternoon. The symposium steering committee, and there's several steering committee members here, I have worked tirelessly to put this exciting event together. And we think it's really a fresh and creative approach to the discussion of retirement. Symposium has been developed to be equally meaningful for pre-retirees as well as for those who have already retired. Now, I suspect I'm not without bias, but I will say that I can't think of a better way to spend a few hours on Saturday, April 10th, than at the School of Nursing with the Retirement Symposium. And I happen to have registration forms here today at the table where you checked in and got your name tag. And I'm sure that Charity Crabtree or Heather Sherman would be happy to give you a registration form if you would like one. So please join us on April 10th for the Retirement Symposium. Now, to set the stage for this April symposium is someone who clearly needs little introduction at Emory. President Elizabeth Quiche is the 8th president of Agnes Scott College. Agnes Scott is a close neighbor and friend of Emory University. President Quiche is a graduate of Davidson College and received a Bachelor of Philosophy and a Doctor of Philosophy from Oxford University. She's a former Rhodes Scholar and has held fellowships at the Harvard Program in Ethics and the Professions, the National Humanities Center, Melbourne University Center on Applied Philosophy and Pure Ethics, and most recently, President Quiche was the director of the Keenan Institute for Ethics and an associate professor of political science and philosophy at Duke. As a founding director of the Keenan Institute for Ethics at Duke, President Quiche has helped to build a university-wide initiative whose mission is to support the study and teaching of ethics and to promote moral reflection and commitment in personal, professional, community, and civic life. It is without further ado that I would like to welcome President Elizabeth Quiche as our speaker today for the Sheth Distinguished Lecture.
Thank you so much, and good afternoon to all of you. I appreciate Nan's warm words of welcome. She and David arrived in Atlanta at about the same time that my husband Jeff and I did, and as a fellow American-Australian couple, it's been great fun to get to know them. I also want to express my thanks to the Sheths, to Jag and Madhu. It's been a delight to meet you both. I actually have a book now to read as well, but I really want to thank you for doing this. I think this is a wonderful gift to Emory, and I hope that I will do an adequate job of living up to some, following on some pretty distinguished speakers who preceded me, including, of course, President Laney. And then I really appreciate, I was just saying to Jim Wagner before that I know he has nothing else to do at all. But so given how crazy busy I know a president's schedule is, I'm especially grateful for his being here and for his colleagueship and just the wonderful friendship that we have as individuals and as our institutions as well. And finally, last but certainly not least, a warm salute to all of you, to members of the Emeritus College. You know, one of the most rewarding and stimulating teaching experiences I've ever had, and one that I hope at some point to replicate here at Agnes Scott, was a course on, it was actually called Ethics Across the Lifespan. And the members of the course were 50% retirees and 50% undergraduates. It was at Duke. And I have to tell you that, this lecture is on creativity in later life. And those retirees in our course were unbelievably lively and engaging, and I would say ferociously candid about ethical challenges they had faced. And one of my favorite memories was we did, because we went through the life cycle, and so there was a session on sex and ethics. And I think all of the Duke undergraduates were thinking, oh goodness, how are we going to be on our best behavior around these old people? And then discovered that the old people, so to speak, were very open about issues of sex and ethics that they had grappled with over their lives. And so one of my favorite memories from that course was the kind of expressions of being agog among these 18 and 19-year-old undergraduates. I hasten to say that is not my topic today, however. Instead, what I want to talk to you about is whether universities should regard moral education, that is, education for personal integrity and responsibility, as an essential goal of a college education. Now, this question has been the subject of vigorous debate in recent years. On the one hand, we've seen a substantial turn, or perhaps more accurately, a return to ethics in the academy. And there's lots of evidence pointing to this. There have been, over the past 15 to 20 years, over 150 ethics centers established at colleges and universities across the country. We've had the creation of numerous undergraduate and professional school courses in ethics, really practical or applied ethics, and increased interest in normative questions, a variety of disciplines from economics to anthropology to theater to literature. New national associations have also emerged to promote ethics in higher education, including the Association for Moral Education, the Association for Practical and Professional Ethics, the Center for Academic Integrity, and the Society for Ethics across the curriculum. And established higher educational associations have also launched initiatives focused on moral education, such as the Core Commitments Project that was launched just a couple of years ago by AACNU, the Association of American Colleges and Universities, and which just this month issued an interesting report entitled Developing a Moral Compass: What is the Campus Climate for Ethics and Academic Integrity? Now, Emory has been a leading voice, especially among research universities, who I think it's fair to say have been the most resistant to this return to ethics, in embracing this trend through the formation of your very active and renowned Center for Ethics, the launch of a new undergraduate ethics minor, and the centrality of ethical engagement in your new strategic plan. On the other hand, as we'll see, this renewed emphasis on ethics has been challenged by some influential voices in the academy who argue that efforts to teach ethics, and especially to promote personal and social responsibility, represent a fundamental corruption of the university's mission. So I'd like to consider these criticisms and to offer some responses to them. But first, I just want to offer a little bit of historical context. The reason I like to call the recent interest in ethics a return or a renewal to ethics is that the centrality of moral education to higher education was considered a given for long periods of history, most notably in the 18th and 19th centuries. It fell off precipitously around the turn of the 20th century. Douglas Sloan, in his study of the teaching of ethics in the American undergraduate curriculum from 1876 to 1976, offers this vivid illustration of what happened, how the teaching of ethics, if you will, fell from grace. He uses the example of Amherst College. Amherst's 1895 catalog opened with a lengthy description of the ethics capstone course, which was taken by every senior at Amherst and was taught by the president of the college. That's 1895. And that ethics capstone course, by the way, was very common at institutions of higher education. By 1905, just 10 years later, ethics had been demoted to an elective course available to sophomores in the philosophy department. Now, what propelled the shift away from moral education and from a notion of its centrality to a college education were a number of important social and intellectual currents, including the elevation of individual and academic freedom to a central academic value, which led to the rejection of some of the frankly narrower doctrinal understandings of moral education prevalent in the 19th century. Also important were the rise of the social and natural sciences as core disciplines in the academy, and ultimately the invention in the early 20th century of the research university. Now, historical narratives of rise and fall, as any historian in the room will be quick to tell you, are rarely as simple as they first appear. So it's important to note that these very changes, the move to establish disciplines in the social and natural sciences, the move to create the research university, were in many, in fact, you might even say most instances, propelled and motivated precisely by strong ethical commitments. Indeed, the social and natural scientists who championed the rise of the research university regarded it as a vital tool for the creation of a more just, humane, and rational system. And certainly, there are good arguments to be made to support that claim. Nor am I advocating any sort of nostalgia for the 19th century academy. Nevertheless, I think it's fair to say that, often at cross purposes with the vision of those who were driving these changes in the academy, the 20th century research university and colleges more general, with its professionalization of faculty and staff roles, its hyper-specialization in areas of research, and the embrace of the ideal of value-free inquiry, was not especially hospitable to ethical concerns. And this was also, to maybe a surprising extent, true in professional schools. And I see Dean Bartlett here, and so I think he'll appreciate this story in particular. I once heard Derek Bach, the former president of Harvard, share a telling story of the decidedly chilly reception he received from some of Harvard Law School's most distinguished professors in the mid-1980s when he was going around Harvard proposing the idea of a center for professional ethics. Derek, he reported one professor told him, "You just don't understand. The whole point of law school is to put students' ethical sensibilities under general anesthesia for 3 years." That's how you turn them into lawyers. Well, I suspect very few law schools say that today. And so we have seen over the last couple of decades a really profound shift towards much greater engagement with, interest in, and embrace of ethical considerations. Now, what drove it? And of course, we could spend a long time debating about, what prompted this. But I would suggest that it's a result of a complex set of developments. On the one hand, the social justice movements of the 1950s, 60s, and 70s, from civil rights to feminism to gay rights to the anti-war and environmental movements, all of these played a critical role in placing normative issues center stage and subjecting the academy to a profound moral and political critique. At the same time, concerns about personal responsibility and integrity, about issues like the rise of divorce, about political and corporate corruption, the Enron scandal, all of these sorts of things, some of them really coming from more of the conservative side of the political spectrum, have also played a very important role in driving a concern with ethical issues in the academy. And so ultimately also did important developments within the academic enterprise itself. For example, revelations about the unethical treatment of research subjects in human experiments, such as the Tuskegee syphilis study, that propelled the growth of bioethics as a field, and important achievements such as the Declaration of Helsinki and the Belmont Report for the Protection of Human Subjects. So, today's return to ethics is certainly not a return to the ways in which the teaching of ethics was conceptualized in the 19th century. It is shaped by developments in between. It's profoundly shaped by commitments to freedom and to diversity in multiple dimensions, including religious, cultural, and ethnic diversity. It tends to eschew didacticism, something that was very comfortably a part of the teaching of ethics in the 19th century, and it places particularly strong emphasis on critique as a sort of central activity in the teaching of ethics. But I would say it also increasingly embraces Aristotle's dictum that the purpose of ethical learning is ultimately to become better people. And there is indeed a growing number of advocates for the teaching of ethics who argue that critique is not enough, and that colleges and universities need to encourage students not only to engage in moral critique, but to embrace moral commitment and action. And I'd say my own personal history, in essence, reflects this shift. As somebody who was trained in philosophy, I began my career teaching ethics in a very conventional way, in a way in which it's actually still taught in a lot of philosophy departments, which, if I could summarize it thus, consisted of having students study virtue ethics and then critique all of the ways in which it doesn't work, then deontology and all of the ways in which it doesn't work, then utilitarianism and all of the ways it doesn't work. And then on the last day of class, some bright student would say, "But what am I supposed to do?" And I would say, "I have no idea. Sorry, class is over." And it was really when I decided to take on the role of directing an ethics institute at Duke some now 14 years ago that I suddenly started to reflect on that not being a terribly satisfactory way of approaching the enterprise of teaching ethics. That in fact, something about what we were doing ought to help students develop resources for moral commitment. And then, of course, that's very complicated. You can't, you still have to respect freedom and diversity. And so it really got me interested in deeper issues of pedagogy and of what counts, what makes a difference in the teaching of ethics. And I remember one very memorable conversation with Alistair McIntyre, who at the time was a professor in the philosophy department at Duke University, very distinguished moral philosopher and legendary iconoclast. And I was very excitedly telling him about all the great things the Keenan Institute for Ethics was doing at Duke. And I noticed his eyes glazing over. And I said, "Alistair, what do you think?" And he gave this sort of world-weary sigh, and he said, "Elizabeth, this is all terribly well-meaning, but that's not how you really teach ethics. The way you teach ethics is you force young people to learn irregular Greek verbs, and you beat them when they get them wrong." Well, I did consider briefly that as an approach to ethics pedagogy, but in a sense, comments like Alistair MacIntyre's did sort of force me to think about, okay, so how do we do this in the curriculum? How do we do it beyond the curriculum? How is it that the experience of coming to college, particularly at residential colleges like Emory and Agnes Scott, can make a difference to young people and the way in which they lead their lives? So the return to ethics in my own life, and I think very much in this movement for creating more ethically engaged institutions, has led to a new vision, one that embraces the teaching of ethics as an essential part of what it means to be a college or a university in the 21st century, and that pays attention to the methods by which that teaching occurs, both in the curriculum, in the formal curriculum, but also in the hidden curriculum, as it's sometimes called, of everyday campus life, and in the ways in which the university or campus conducts itself. An excellent distillation of this view can be found in the Association of American Colleges and Universities' 5 dimensions of personal and social responsibility, which is something that they developed, as I mentioned, in 2007. What they've tried to do is to really think about, if we take ethics seriously and our mission of teaching ethics seriously, what is it that we really want college students to acquire and to learn and to be inspired to develop? And so here are the 5 that they suggest. First, to strive for excellence, developing a strong work ethic and consciously doing one's best in all aspects of college. Second, cultivating personal and academic integrity, recognizing and acting on a sense of honor, ranging from honesty in relationships to principled engagement with an academic honor code. Third, a sense of needing to contribute to a larger community, a recognition and a willingness to act on one's responsibilities to the educational community and the wider society, locally, nationally, and globally. Fourth, a willingness to take seriously the perspectives of others, to recognize and act on the obligation to inform one's own judgment, engaging diverse and competing perspectives as a resource for learning, citizenship, and work. And finally, competence in ethical and moral reasoning and action, developing ethical and moral reasoning and using it in learning and in life. That phrase, using it in learning and in life, is really quite a radical claim around the teaching of ethics by comparison with some of the ways in which the academy understood itself just a few years ago. As I discovered when we were crafting the Keenan Institute for Ethics mission statement, and I said, well, we should say promote moral reflection and commitment. And boy, was that word commitment controversial to people. Not everyone is applauding, however. Let me cite, then, 2 distinguished examples of those who criticize, and I would say even reject, this return to ethics. First, the noted political scientist John Mearsheimer, a very distinguished scholar, who, when asked in 1997 to present the University of Chicago's storied Aims of Education address — this is a lecture that's presented every year to the incoming freshman class — used it in part as an occasion to criticize the idea of an ethically engaged university. He argued that the purpose of a university education is to help students think critically, broaden their intellectual horizons, and promote greater self-awareness. What the university does not do, he added, is, quote, provide you with moral guidance. Indeed, it is and ought to be a remarkably amoral institution. The university does not and should not, he said, offer courses, quote, where you discuss ethics or morality in any detail, nor should it see as part of its mission to help students, quote, in sorting out the ethical issues they will face in their lives. The most noted critic of the turn to ethics is the literary scholar Stanley Fish, who in a series of delightfully provocatively titled essays — I wish I had his skill in entitling essays. These include Aim Low, Why We Built the Ivory Tower, and Save the World on Your Own Time, which he has actually expanded into a book. He has argued that since the job of the university is, quote, quite simply to produce and disseminate academic knowledge and to train those who will take up that task in the future, it is a bad and unworkable idea for universities to embrace moral and civic education as a goal. The university, he argues, pursues academic purposes, not moral ones. Faculty should try to make students into good scholars, but eschew any attempt to engage or shape their students' character and lives beyond the classroom, because all efforts to pursue moral and civic education, according to Fish, are doomed to lapse into dangerous forms of dogmatism or partisanship. Now, both Mearsheimer and Fish seem to think that no form of moral and civic education can ever exemplify academic virtues of rigorous analysis, attentiveness to multiple perspectives, and commitment to truth, which basically makes me think that neither of them has spent any time in courses in ethics. When students are asked to consider and present arguments for and against human rights, stem cell research, or the International Criminal Court, when they're invited to assess the strengths and weaknesses of different approaches to social justice or educational reform, it is precisely through rigorous analysis, attentiveness to multiple perspectives, and commitment to the truth that moral education is being pursued. To be sure, and this is where I think that actually, particularly Stanley Fish has provided a helpful service to those of us interested in moral education in the modern college and university. It's true, faculty can abuse their power by imposing their moral and political views on students, or they can present material in intellectually dishonest and partisan ways. And so Fish and Mearsheimer do help us to see the dangers in these actions. But their suggestion that it is impossible simultaneously to pursue what they call academic purposes and moral purposes is unpersuasive. But another critique, somewhat different critique of the ethically engaged university offered by Stanley Fish is that it's just not our job. As he puts it, no doubt, the practices of responsible citizenship and moral behavior should be encouraged in young adults, but it's not the business of the university to do so. And this was actually something I heard fairly often from faculty at Duke. You know, people who said, well, this is all very good, but it's not what I learned in graduate school. I'm not, I don't know how to be a moral tutor. And so don't ask me to be engaged in the teaching of ethics. And one of the responses that I would often give, let's say to a natural scientist, is you don't need to change who you are. Talk about the ethical issues that are inherent in your work. Talk about how science would never have been able to progress if people were not honest about their results. If you talk about that with passion, and if you also treat students with decency and kindness in the classroom, you are engaged in moral education. And to be fair, Stanley Fish does make an exception for issues of academic ethics, the morality, as he puts it, that penalizes cheating, plagiarizing, and shoddy teaching. So yes, he would suggest universities can, as long as they focus very narrowly on academic ethics, they can engage in the teaching of ethics. And that's an important and welcome exception. Because frankly, I have to tell you that the news about the academic and personal ethics of young people in America is pretty disturbing. And for instance, just to name the results of one study, the Josephson Institute's 2008 report card on the ethics of American youth, something that they've done every 2 years for the past decade or so, reveals that 64% of the high school students surveyed had cheated in the past year, 64%. 38% reported that they had cheated more than twice. And these statistics have been rising steadily since the Josephson Institute started doing this survey. Very disturbingly, 30% reported that they had stolen from a store in the past year. 23% that they had stolen from a parent or close relative, and 1 in 5 that they had stolen from a friend. And yet, a whopping 93% reported that they were satisfied with their personal ethics and character, and 77% agreed with the statement, "When it comes to doing what is right, I am better than most people I know." Really scary. When I think about, and I suspect that Agnes Scott and Emory get a kind of different slice of the high school population in some ways, as schools with a strong commitment to ethics, but nevertheless, it's an eye-opener when you think about the culture that a lot of young people experience in their high schools. The most disturbing aspect of that 2008 Josephson survey was what appears to be, and by the way, I'm not here to beat up on young people, because I think they reflect what's going on in the larger culture, but was an apparent rise in cynicism among young people. Those 17 and under were 5 times more likely than those over 50 in a survey that Josephson conducted with people all across the lifespan, to believe that lying and cheating are necessary to succeed. 51% of those under 17 said they agreed with the statement, lying and cheating is necessary to succeed, versus 10% of those over 50. Among adults, it also appears that cynicism, if you take, answering yes to you have to lie and cheat to succeed, cynicism translates into, it's not surprising, into more unethical behavior. So those who reported that lying and cheating are necessary to succeed also reported lying and cheating more on things like lying to a customer, that was one of the questions, inflating expense claims or insurance claims, lying to their boss, or lying to their spouse or significant other. This is very depressing, but I think it also needs to be a call to action to colleges and universities, because what the research on academic integrity in colleges and universities demonstrates, and there's very clear evidence supporting this, is that context and culture make a profound difference in students' behavior. So a student can come out of a high school where there has been rampant cheating. If they come to a college or university context where from the very beginning they hear, this is a place where we expect you to act with integrity. This is a place with high ethical standards. It makes a difference. Donald McCabe with the Center for Academic Integrity, who has done research now for over 20 years and drawn on research from the 1960s, show that students cheat much less, half as much, at schools with honor codes or strong cultures of ethical commitment. And while there's been less research done on this, but what there has been done is fairly promising, is that once embedded in an honor code culture, students do, at least some of them do, embrace those values and carry them with them in later life, particularly given what a critical developmental period college or professional school are for young people. As Don McCabe likes to summarize this, he calls it the 20-60-20 rule. He says, when it comes to college, 20% of the students won't cheat no matter what. It's this really strong sort of sense of a personal code. 20% of them will cheat no matter what. They're those sort of die-hard cynics. And 60% are looking to see, how do people live around here? What are the rules of the game here? What do people believe in this culture? And then, if you can make that culture really strong, you can start to move more of those who are in the 60% into that group who hopefully will develop a strong personal compass that they can bring into other contexts beyond it. Now, if all of this is true, then I would suggest not only do we have to teach ethics in the curriculum, but we also have to pay attention to that hidden curriculum of everyday campus life and to the ways in which the university or college conducts itself. Because what you see in that, I believe, in that cynicism on the part of the high school kids is they're looking around and seeing a lot of unethical behavior and mimicking it in their own attitudes and behaviors. But here, and this is the last of Fish's critiques I want to share, here he is actually adamant that kind of attention to the hidden curriculum or the ethics of college and university practices is deeply disturbing to him. He says, no university, this is one of my favorite statements from his work, no university, and therefore no university official should ever take a stand on any social, political, or moral issue. And it is immoral, he says, to do so. Fish condemns as a collective lapse in judgment those who put pressure on universities to change practices such as labor rules regarding the manufacture of licensed apparel, or global equity and investment policy, or efforts to raise the wages or benefits of university staff, or efforts to promote environmental sustainability. Instead, he says, it is the duty of university officers to, quote, expand the endowment by any legal means available, employ the best workers at the lowest possible wages, and make the athletics program as profitable as possible. Now, of course, as Jim Wagner knows very well, and Jim Laney, and certainly, you know, I've joked about how being a college president is, it's not a joke, it's true, is a job in practical ethics. The joke is that sometimes I feel like the chickens have come home to roost as I go from being an ethics center director to a college president. But the truth is that colleges and universities take stances on moral issues every day. From fair wages to parental leave policies to environmental conservation, how we conduct ourselves is profoundly implicated in ethical issues. A college or university president can't avoid taking a stand on fair wages, since, you know, we help set the wages for groundskeepers, cafeteria workers, and janitorial staff. We cannot avoid taking a stand on environmental conservation, since we have to make choices on what we do in that area, whether or not to recycle, how to allocate resources for energy, what environmental norms to follow in new construction. In effect, Fish is arguing that in the interest of protecting our core academic mission, academic leaders should endorse lowest common denominator policies in all areas of university life other than teaching and research, because everything else gets in the way. Yet I would submit that it is precisely in those areas of the hidden curriculum and how we conduct ourselves that we may have the most profound impact on students and on what they ultimately learn about what it's like to be an educated person, what norms they should follow in their lives. So there are inescapable moral decisions and learning opportunities in how colleges and universities conduct themselves. And it is this constant balancing act, because of course you can't do all of the right things you'd want to do in a world of limited resources. You have to do as good as you possibly can. And it also points to the ways in which we need to, as educators, balance out critique and commitment, have that honor code, but also have opportunities to debate the best ways to promote academic integrity, have university policies, as both Emory and Agnes Scott do, for environmental sustainability, but also ensure that there is rigorous debate about what the right thing to do is in the environment. So it's true, an ethically engaged university for the 21st century does have to constantly confront some hard questions. How to emphasize moral formation and moral development while still respecting freedom and diversity. How to deal with the intersection of morality and politics and morality and religion. How to balance the multiple missions of higher education and reconcile individual and institutional self-interest with compelling moral demands. But at its best, the effort to create an ethically engaged university is, contra Stanley Fish and John Mearsheimer, not a recipe for moral indoctrination, nor a corruption of the university's mission to pursue truth. Rather, it is a commitment to ensure that students have opportunities to think deeply about moral issues, to experience scholarship and academic life as domains governed by high ethical standards, and that they and we, all of us in the academy, are encouraged to be reflective, open, and self-critical while making moral commitments and standing up for them. Thank you. I would love to, yes. Yes, please.
Yes, we're having a conference here on medical volunteers in about 2.5 weeks. And it's open free to anybody on Emory's campus. And there are about 25 nonprofits that are helping with this venture. And I will say the entire effort is a result of volunteerism from the students and the community at large in doing this. And I think that, and it's at a website, emoryimvc.org, that anybody can go and attend. We have people from Mayo Clinic coming, Cleveland Clinic, and various places throughout the entire community. But I want to say that, in line with what you said, the people who are the most powerful that I've learned from as a faculty member at Emory are the students themselves teaching me. And one highlighting, I just want to give you an example of one student who's going to be highlighted besides the 110 nonprofit organizations. She is blind. She walks around Emory's campus blind. She came from Colombia, South America. Her mother was a domestic. She's blind because at age 3 she had glaucoma and no access to health care. Here on a scholarship at Emory. Her mother worked real hard and got her to America. She encouraged her to study blind. And this student now is of the Association for Georgia of Students Who Are Blind to help Georgian students and young people who are blind get through life. To me, we can learn a lot more from her than we could learn from anybody else.
That's wonderful. Thank you for sharing that. And I absolutely agree with you that that at colleges and universities where there is a, if you will, a commitment, a public commitment to ethics, to service, and a willingness to learn from our students and to liberate their incredible creative energies around these issues. It's just remarkable what can happen. And I can just very quickly share that, part of our, just as yours, your strategic plan focuses on ethics. Part of ours is, we use the phrase at Agnes Scott, living honorably. We're committed to becoming a laboratory for living honorably. And it has been so exciting to see, both exciting and sometimes a little daunting, to see the ways in which students embrace that notion of living honorably. When I say it's daunting when they tell me, the ways in which I'm living up to it, that can be a little daunting, but very exciting and inspiring to see what they do with that. It's great. Yes, sir.
You as well.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Sorry.
Yeah.
Leads to happiness and quality of life. And so the overall framework of quality of life, I think, is a basis for approach that I'd like to know what you think of that.
I think that's very true. We have a first-year seminar at the college on happiness and virtue. And I do believe that one of the most important things that those of us committed to liberal education need to be saying, and it's a very countercultural thing to say, although it represents the wisdom from across all major religious and wisdom traditions, is that the ethical life is the good life, is the happy life. Now, there are, as in every case, there's room for argument and everything, but there's so much truth to, and I think frankly, young people are hungry for a vision of a good life that is richer and more nuanced than what they and we are constantly hearing, sort of the good life as the consumerist life, the good life as the acquisition of more and more. And I think that's actually one of the most important purposes of higher education, is to find, to continue to find ways of championing that wisdom in the lives of our students and in the larger society. There was actually, I'm going to let Nan, Nan take the,
Yes. Dr. Wagner.
Stand and, yes, wait for the mic. We really
Great.
want all of us here.
great.
Those critics of ethics at universities and who are so concerned about the core business, how do they countenance the athletic programs that surely are quite far away from the core business and further away than ethics? In fact, a number of these athletic programs need a lot of ethics. In the current basketball tournament, one university graduated 6% of their players, and even Georgia Tech graduated, I think, 38%. So how do they balance these two issues?
Great question. I wish I knew. I mean, my sense is that where Stanley Fish is coming from on that point is if you will, a highly compartmentalized focus on the research mission of the university, and then an assumption that if you make the athletics program very profitable, it will feed that research mission. What that, as you rightly point out, pays no attention to is, frankly, our educational obligations to the athletes themselves. And I don't know how many of you are on or receive Inside Higher Education, which is the email. It's a free email kind of information service. But one of the things they do every year, which I love, is they look at for March Madness, they do a bracket of the 64 schools on the basis of graduation rates. And so they tell you, who would win if what you were looking at is graduation rates. So I agree with you, absolutely. That's a very important point. Do we have a gentleman over?
Yes.
Okay, great. We have a gentleman.
Sorry. I'm a pediatrician and a contrarian like an adolescent, so I'll take a couple of contrarian positions.
Great.
We do best mostly where we work, but not where we live. And many in academia don't know much about what's going on in their community that we have to react to. There are two items. One, a festering one. We have one of the worst public health county health centers right in the middle of Atlanta with all our resources. And no matter how much I and others have talked, we still have the worst. But that's a long term. But the more recent one is one you've addressed in terms of cheating. I've been very distressed having 5 kids who went to Atlanta public schools to have this cheating erasure problem. So, like a Don Quixote, I've gotten into it and found out with 2 of my colleagues in the School of Public Health that there's a lot of problematic statistics, and if you read the editorials, etc., yesterday's, for instance, that there's a lot of blaming the parents, the kids, the teachers, the supervisors, etc., based on a report, when you look at it, has a lot of fallacies. It's being looked at, but I have not seen, I've been very close to it, I haven't seen, maybe Dr. Wagner might know, anybody from academia respond to this disgrace to our kids, to our parents, our communities. Is there really that much cheating in 54 schools? With all the classes or whatever? This is ridiculous. There must be some, but not everywhere. So I just want to know, maybe I'm wrong, maybe academia has been involved, all the colleges and universities have not reacted. Don't they have kids or grandkids in Atlanta schools? Maybe I'm being too critical, Jim. If there's people at Emory, I'd like to know. I only know 3 of us trying to do something about it.
Jim, did you want to address that, or?
Andy, I'm not aware of anyone addressing. You're talking about addressing it as a responsibility.
To find out what the facts are.
Yeah, I do not.
Papers have come out saying they're all cheats and all these kids.
So these are these self-reported surveys, yeah.
And so forth. And the survey, if you look at the
This is the end of grade exams and yes, the erasures.
Huge number of schools and classes.
Yes, yes.
Yesterday it said, why would they do that to the first and second grades, since they're not under this having to be good or
Yes.
whatever to get up.
Yes. No, I
Find it also in the first and second grade.
right, and I think it's a really important issue, and it's interesting that you raise the question of, should the academy should there have been more of an effort to participate in this public discussion. I can tell you, I've been very disturbed by the allegations that were made, I guess, by the state government vis-a-vis the Atlanta public schools. And my understanding is that it's now, obviously it needs an independent investigation. And the question is it an adequately independent investigation? And I would say that, at least from what the media reports, I had wished that there had been sort of stronger statements made about if what's happening is scores are actually being erased in order to help schools in this kind of high stakes testing environment, then that's the worst possible outcome. It's not serving the students because they're not learning, and it's certainly not serving them from a perspective of moral education. That's my understanding, yes.
Able apparently to get the company that does these things to let them access to it. And this is where I think we can put some pressure on to access that and find out what the statistical facts are, and
not just these wild allegations flying in every direction. Good point.
Two things that I'm concerned about in the academic environment. And that's when students, I deal mainly with medical students, see things that they have concerns about, including ethical behavior. Obviously, they're reluctant to bring it up because they face a penalty. If they criticize or have a question about a resident or about a fellow or even about the attending, what is that going to do to their ultimate letters of recommendations? So what I think about and wonder about, how can we teach students how to deal with these, how to say things that don't incriminate themselves so much? Maybe ask a question, explain to me why you did it this way. And secondly, how do we provide safe harbor for those who have the guts to report what they see as egregious, not only in the academic environment, in business and everything else. This seems to me a crucial part of understanding and learning about ethical behavior.
Thank you. It's a wonderful, wonderful comment, and I agree wholeheartedly. And I like the way in which you framed it as a two-part. That part of what we need to do is to equip students with how you can constructively raise ethical issues. And of course, part of that is also to do everything we can, whatever our position is, to create a climate where it is part of the culture to talk about ethical issues. I do that, for example, with trying to help students think about how do you confront a peer who is cheating. That's an incredibly difficult thing to do. And part of what I think students need, young people need, all of us need, is scripts, if you will. What are things that you can say to somebody that doesn't demean them, but that clearly communicates, I'm very concerned about what you're doing. But then, as you say, we also need to look at, and I don't think, for example, the academic research enterprise has developed particularly strong safeguards, or I don't know much about medical schools, but safeguards for whistleblowers. I think that's a really, really important issue. I did some research ethics training when I was at Duke, and would hear stories from faculty as well as from students about their experiences both at Duke and beyond, of really egregious behavior on the part of some individuals in the field, and who were regarded as sort of powerful individuals and untouchable. And, that's a terrible situation. And so we do need to, I think, develop some stronger mechanisms. There are some good examples. There are actually some, I think, quite successful examples in the corporate world of whistleblower policies that are my personal favorite. I actually for a while collected ethics codes, and my personal favorite was, I hope they're still using this code, was Cummins Engine Company, which had this absolutely terrific code that said if somebody, no matter how powerful, is asking you to do something that you just don't think is right, that you wouldn't want on the 6 o'clock news, that you wouldn't want to share with your grandmother or someone that this is literally what it said in the code, then don't do it. It was all in caps. Instead, do one of these, try these various things, and they said talk to the person's supervisor, call this whistleblower hotline. They gave various options. And then the code also went on to say doing the right thing will sometimes make us lose money, and that's okay because we want to do the right thing. I just loved that code. It was so crystal clear about their degree of commitment to creating an ethical culture. And so I think if we can figure out ways of developing those sorts of mechanisms, and there are some resources in other fields that we can draw on.
I think we're going to have to limit the question, so this will be the last question, and then perhaps if you have a minute afterward to...
I'm very happy to, yes. to chat afterwards, yeah.
I appreciate your well-informed and decisive analysis of this issue and your impassioned treatment of it as well. I just wanted to, and I'm probably coming from right field on this, ask a question of a sort that hasn't been asked yet, and that has to do with the foundations, perhaps the theoretical foundations of ethics, which you must think about a good deal too. And I didn't hear anything about that from you today. And it seems to me if ethics is on the move and gaining in interest and popularity, the same is true as of another field. It seems to me has some direct bearing on practical ethics, which I think is what we're talking about mostly. And that is a movement that's sprung up in the 1970s, spearheaded by E.O. Wilson, and was called Sociobiology. And now I think the term evolutionary psychology perhaps has taken over. And what that does, which seems to me is relevant to what we're all talking about, is to provide an explanation, I think a very plausible one, although there's a lot of controversy, about why we behave as we do. There's in our behavior a good deal of built-in aggressiveness and selfishness. By the same token, and Darwin didn't really give a clear-cut notion of this, there's also a good deal of cooperation and of altruism. And so it seems to me that if you're going to talk to people about ethical consciousness, ethical principles, and try to shape a more ethical society, you might want to pay more attention to the biological bases of why we act as we do. In other words, human nature is critical here, and there's a long legacy of forces, evolutionary forces, neurological forces, and so on that shaped what we are. And if you're going to try to change people, why not understand more fully, biologically, why they behave as they do?
It's a wonderful comment, and I agree with you absolutely. I think that work in sociobiology, which of course sort of got a bad name historically, but in fact there's been some really excellent work in sociobiology in recent years. Neuroscience is very important, I would say, for ethicists to be engaged with, to try to understand, we are an animal species. How did we come to develop various codes? What are the foundations of those codes? And I also think a different. I mean, so the notion about are there evolutionary bases for cooperation? There clearly are. Are there evolutionary bases for empathy? You know, it's fascinating how you have a baby, you put a bunch of babies together, and one starts to cry, the others all start to cry. There's very clear evidence from sort of very, very early childhood that there are certain resources for empathy that are innate, that are, you know, they're presumably the product of evolution and you know, complex logical and social evolution. So I think all of that is immensely instructive in thinking about ethics. Another thing that I find immensely instructive in thinking about ethics is the fact that you look at, you know, the Hebrew Bible, the New Testament, the Bhagavad Gita, the Quran, the Jain texts. I mean, across all of the major religious traditions, you find the golden rule. I mean, when people have thought long and hard and deep about how we ought to live with one another, which as human beings we have to do, they have come to very similar conclusions about, if you will, an ethics of reciprocity. So yes, I think that those are very fruitful. I think where I get uncomfortable at times is when people think that we can draw then normative conclusions from empirical data. I think there's no amount of empirical data in a sense that gives us an answer to the question, what ought I to do in this situation? But I do think that empirical work across many fields, the natural sciences and the social sciences, illuminates what's going on in this whole enterprise of the doing of ethics. So.
I think it would be appropriate for Judge Sheth to have the last word or question. If you
I have a question. First of all, thank you very, very much.
Thank you. Thank you.
I have a two-part question. The dilemma between ethics and science. Is it globally prevalent across other countries' research-oriented universities? And how do you see the same dilemma in corporate R&D? A lot of scientific work goes on. A lot of Nobel Prizes are won by the labs kinds of people. And what happens there? Do you think they have the same dilemma as we do? Or have they been able to resolve better than we have done?
Oh, that's a great question. Could everybody hear the question? So the question is, are the dilemmas that we face in ethics and science present or prevalent in the same way across cultures and societies, or also, you mentioned corporate R&D, some of the ethical dilemmas that arise in that field. Are there different solutions, you know, potentially better solutions that have been developed in other cultures and societies? And I honestly, you know, I don't have it's not an area that I've studied, so I don't really have an answer to that. But I do think it's really interesting and important to have international conversations about things like research ethics and R&D, because there are somewhat different, you know, having talked about some of the universality of an ethics of reciprocity, for example, there are also sources of sort of particularities of moral wisdom in different cultures and different societies, and it may well be that there are resources for that. And, you know, I mean, this is not exactly addressing your question, but I've been struck, for example, by the extent to which I've actually talked to a number of people in research ethics about this, where there's been so much emphasis, I think quite appropriately given the history, on the protection of human subjects in research. And, you know, there's terrible things were done to human subjects and irresponsible things and really weren't seen as ethical issues. And so, but it may be that we have swung in some ways, the pendulum has swung so far towards the protection of individual human interests that the whole notion of an ethic of civic obligation to participate in ethical research, or of generosity, even a language of, as part of my desire to serve my community, I will be a part of medical testing, for instance. That is an ethic that has not been a part of our conversation, and so maybe that could be an interesting corrective, perhaps, to an important and understandable kind of ethical discourse, which may ultimately end up preventing people from being participants in research. So that's an example of that. But anyway, thank you for that question. That's great. Thank you all so much.
Thank you so much, President Kish. We send you out into this beautiful spring afternoon with lots of things to think about. Our proceedings have concluded.
The preceding program is copyrighted by Emory University.